Good morning. Thank you for coming, even though I assume many of you have very bad hangovers. Now, about a year ago, I started trying to get a vegan meal in every university canteen in France. I have not been a student for a very long time, and yet me and my friends, we sat down and we thought about what could we do that could actually help animals in France. And we realized that if we were able to get every university canteen in France to serve a vegan meal, currently very, very few offer this, and around 13% of students took that meal, which research suggests would be a minimum, that would be about 8 million more vegan meals served in France every single year. And of course, that would inform entire generations of people that eating vegan food was not only easy, but was completely normal. And I don't need to tell you guys that the benefits of that for the animals, environment, consumers is absolutely astounding. So I created a new organization with that one very specific aim called Assiettes Végétales, which means vegan plate. And we set about trying to convince 28 regional administrations in France that we need to convince to take this decision. We started petitioning the organizations with paper and online petitions. We printed leaflets, we built a website, we created a brand, we organized actions. I asked our supporters to write individual emails and also handwritten letters, simply asking for them to be able to eat in their own student canteen. It's a very basic ask, I'm sure you will agree. And of course, we did much more than this. We even started semi-stalking the administration directors to try and jump in and talk to them where they least expected it. Where did this actually get us? If I'm honest, we didn't get very far. One university canteen in Strasbourg, which is where I live, so we're able to actually put more pressure on the administration there, started testing a vegan meal in one of their canteens every Wednesday. So it's a much smaller ask than what we wanted. And then they stopped responding to our emails. Another administration invited us for a meeting, simply to aggressively insult us and then commit to nothing. And most of the others either responded with very vague, unpromising, negative, or simply confused emails to what we were asking. And if I'm honest, most of them just did not respond to us. All of that changed about 2 weeks ago. But before I go into how, I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about what I do. Now, everything I've just described takes place in France. I do all of this in my spare time. My real life, in my actual job, I'm Director of Communications for Anima International. Now, Anima International, I'm sure many of you already know, it's the new coalition of Open Cages and Anima groups across 9 different countries in Europe. I do a lot of different things in my job, but I do try and concentrate on skill sharing and helping my colleagues where I can better communicate, especially when communicating, I'm not doing a very good job there, with the press. Before I joined Anima International, I used to work for the Vegetarian Society in the UK. I volunteered for a while with the Good Food Institute, and for 4 years I was the senior campaign coordinator for PETA. That means that over the course of the last 7 years, whether I liked it or not, I've had to work with the press. I've spent a lot of time writing press releases. I've spent a lot of my time on television interviews, radio interviews, basically trying to get the animal rights movement talked about in newspapers and online. I like to think that I learned a few things along the way. For example, here you can see me learning what it feels like to be told, to be asked on national television live how I sleep at night. That was fun. This one, I'm learning how to pretend that I'm not annoyed that two presenters are just talking over me. And in the middle, this was a very rare occurrence. This was when I went on to debate about veganism, and everyone that they got to debate with me agreed with me. The guy on this side, he was a doctor, and he said, yeah, you shouldn't eat meat. It's very bad for your health. And this guy was a head chef at a Hilton hotel, I think. And by the end of the interview, he was sat there like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be serving meat to these people. It's very cruel. All I had to do was sit and nod. So yeah, this was a very strange occurrence. But in all seriousness, I do think I have learned a few things throughout my mistakes and my learning curve throughout my time working with the press. And I want to share two of those things with you right now. The first thing is that journalists can be extremely annoying. They can be rude, they can be aggressive, and they can also be hard or impossible to get hold of. The second thing is that they can also be very friendly, can be very dedicated, and most importantly, for everyone in this room, I think, they can be absolutely vital to the success of our campaigns. And that is why, in this talk, I'm going to talk through two very basic things. Firstly, why work with the press if you're working with an animal rights group or you're just an individual who wants to do more and get that into newspapers or online. The second thing is how to work with the press. And my colleague Anya will be talking a little bit more about that straight after my talk. Now, there is a third part to this talk as well, because I can stand here for hours and tell you about things that I've done, mistakes I've made. But if you guys don't take away my ideas or my advice and make it work for your countries, in your organizations, it's going to be quite meaningless. So I'm really relying on you guys to make the most of today and try and implement some of these things when you do get back home and you're not hungover. So why work with the press? Before we get into the how, I think it's really important to just briefly touch on the why. For people who have worked with the press before, I can see a few people in the room who I know have. Maybe you feel the same as me, but working with them quite often, you kind of lose sight of the end goal and you start thinking that getting in the press, being interviewed or having a newspaper article is the actual aim, and that once you've got the article, you've won, and that you celebrate just the fact of getting into the press. But of course, that is absolutely not the case. The aim of getting in the press is being able to meet your actual campaign goals. So for example, if you're campaigning against a supermarket and you're trying to get them to go cage-free, for example, getting your demonstration outside their headquarters in the press can help you appear more powerful, can help you put more pressure on that company and meet your aim of securing that policy. On the other hand, if you're just interested in getting your organization's name more known, or if you want more supporters, more donors, getting in the press can help you meet that aim. So this is why it's very important. We all need to just internalize this before we go any further, because getting in the press is not the aim. Getting in the press can help you achieve your aim. The second thing it can help you achieve is to get more authority. It helps you appear more important. It can help you, again, appear more powerful to whoever you're campaigning against. Just by getting in the press, you seem more real. Because, of course, everything in the press is the truth, right? That's how it works. That's a joke, by the way. But it can honestly make you appear more legitimate. Again, another example. Let's imagine for a second that you are this supermarket again, and people are campaigning against you to get the cage-free policy. There are two groups campaigning against you. The first one is active only on Facebook. They have a lot of supporters on there, and they write on your Facebook wall all the time that they want you to go cage-free. The second group does different campaigns. They quite often get those campaigns into the press. Just last week, they had a national newspaper article about the issue, calling you out for not having this policy. Imagine you're the communications director for this supermarket. Which one of these organizations seems to you more like the one that you want to reach out to first, or the one who's posing more of a threat to your organization? If it was me, I would for sure reach out to the one who is getting in the press frequently, because my CEO reads those newspapers, as do our investors. Can I just get a show of hands here? How many people have ever been interviewed on television? Okay, actually quite a lot of people in this room. Would you agree with me that that is a very scary thing to do? Yeah, I see a lot of nods of the heads there. I've done a lot of television interviews. I hate them. I will never get over that. I think I would just have to pretend for the rest of my life that I'm fine. And yet, when I was thinking about this talk today, I was trying to think, okay, what are my biggest fears when campaigning? Just have a think about that, because I came up with things like, I don't know, being sued, probably quite scary. Being insulted in the street, not great. Maybe failing. That's one that I'm really scared of. And yet, to be honest, one of my biggest fears is actually this. Inbox 0. And by that, I mean being ignored. If you're being ignored in your campaign, that means it's going to be very hard for you to progress with your campaign. You always need more information. You need the company or the people you're campaigning against to react. And you need them to engage with your campaign. They may simply just ignore your emails, ignore your calls, ignore your demonstrations. And let me tell you one thing, if they can ignore you, they absolutely will. And that is why, like, if you can imagine, if you're being ignored, you always need to do something about that. Getting in the press is one of those things, because they won't ignore a journalist. At least, if they want to keep their job, they won't ignore the journalist. As soon as a journalist calls them up and asks them for a comment about the new undercover investigation that shows cruelty in one of their farms, I can guarantee you that the person, probably the communications director, will want to respond to them directly. And they will have been forced to respond to your campaign. They've put new information into the public, and now you have got the upper hand. Getting in the press can also help you improve your reach. Now, it's great if you use social media to share your undercover investigations or your information, and you should absolutely continue to do that. But wouldn't it be great if you could increase your reach by maybe 100 people, or 1,000 people, or even 100,000 people? If you're doing a demonstration in the street, you might talk to about 40 people, and that's wonderful. But what we need to see and think about every time we're doing a campaign is that if we use a third party, and I argue today that that third party should quite often be the press, we can multiply and amplify our reach to a lot more people by simply using a third party as the amplifier. Finally, another reason why we need to be using the press is because every single company that you could even consider campaigning against, every industry, is already using the press to get people to think positive thoughts about them, to buy their products, and to continue profiting from animal exploitation. I'm thinking like in terms of the meat industry, the fur industry, circuses, dolphin aquariums, everything. They will all pay people, sometimes one person, sometimes entire departments of people, to work with the press and get good, positive coverage. We need to combat this by working within the same mediums and show our side of the story. Of course, that means we will have to work harder, we'll have to work smarter, because I don't know about you, but I don't have a budget like these companies, nowhere near. So those are just some things, some reasons why I think it is so important that we should work with the press. I'm going to move just quickly on to talk about how we should actually do that. Now, here's the thing about journalists. They are all incredibly busy people. They have got overflowing inboxes. Their phone is ringing off the hook. They really want to impress their bosses. They've got an article to write with a deadline to do it in. They want to do it with reliable information. They want to do it quickly, and they want to get a promotion. Meet every journalist in the world. That's every one of them. Now that we know what these people are like, what can we do to get them our stories, to get them to write about what we want them to write about? Well, this guy, Jonathan Grun, he's editor at the Press Association, and he says, interesting stories and speed of response are the secret to building long-lasting relationships with journalists. I really agree with that, so I'm going to give you some quick tips on how to best achieve that. The first one, which I think is very important, it's a subtle but important difference. When speaking with a journalist, when pitching them a story, we really need to make sure that we are giving them a story. We're not just giving them a piece of news or facts. Let me talk a little bit about that difference. I want to just do like a mini experiment here. Let's imagine for a second that everyone in this room, you're all journalism students, okay? You go to a university, you study journalism, I'm your teacher. I'm going to give you an assignment. I want you to write an article about a piece of information. That piece of information is that your school, called Spring Green University, next week is going to be entirely refurbished. So it's going to be completely repainted, new furniture, new everything, and it's going to take a week. Have a think about what your article would be if you had to write an article about this subject. Just take a few seconds. Maybe just think of a headline or something. Now, if you're like most people, you probably came up with an article like this. Spring Green School to get a fresh new look. That's an article. That's some information. Is it going to sell newspapers? Probably not. But I hope that a few of you here saw what the real story was. This is the one that's going to get people clicking on the link, that's going to sell the newspapers and will get people talking on campus. And this is using the exact same information. We just turned it into an actual story. Whenever you are campaigning or trying to pitch a story to the press, you always need to think, how can I take the information that I have and turn it into a story? See the difference? Information, story. It can make the difference between a story and no story in the paper. The next thing is that timing is everything. And by that I mean, sometimes when you pitch your story can be just as important as who you pitch it to and what your story is. It can be the difference often between having no coverage and getting coverage everywhere. For example, If you are campaigning against, again, this same supermarket we've been talking about, asking them to go cage-free, and you're going to do a demonstration, it makes a lot more sense if you do the demonstration outside their annual general meeting, for example. That happens once a year, and it's going to be a lot more controversial. It just packages itself a lot nicer for a journalist because it creates more controversy. It means every staff member, all the directors, all the CEOs, investors will see your demonstration as they walk into that building. In my experience, the press are more likely to write about your demonstration if there is a reason why it's taking place right now. Similarly, if you have got some new statistics showing the increase in the number of people eating vegan in your country or a new boom in vegan products, it makes a lot more sense if you release that information on World Vegan Day, or if you don't have a World Vegan Day, create one. If you don't want to do that, then you could release it in January when more people are talking about eating vegan or healthy food, maybe want to consider trying vegan for a month. Again, the journalists not only need this story, they need a reason, why are you telling me this now? Why should I be interested today? Again, this is another thing to add to your checklist to think about every time you're pitching a story. The next thing is that you need to speak for your audience. Ideally, you would not send the same press release to every single journalist you have. You should tailor your press release and all of your communication with journalists depending on what outlet they work for. How you speak to a right-wing, trashy celebrity magazine known for its really in-depth celebrity stories should be very different to how you speak to, a liberal political magazine known for its very serious, in-depth political content. For example, if you're pitching, let's imagine that we have a story, we have a new undercover investigation on a fur farm in Lithuania, and this is something I actually did very recently, and you're pitching to the celebrity newspaper. Hi, I thought I've skipped forward. I thought your readers might be interested to hear about this story, considering last week's bust-up on social media about Angelina Jolie choosing to dress her children in fur hats. That didn't happen, by the way, I made that up. The really shocking thing is that fur from farms like these is ending up on our high streets. So it affects mums around the country. Now, this piece of information, it first says why it is of interest to the outlet. No, actually, it says first why it's of interest now, because just last week there was a huge social media storm talking about fur. And it also says why it is of interest to their readers, because it actually could be affecting, mums could be being tricked all around the country into buying fur that they think is fake. Second example, hi, I thought your readers might be interested to hear about this story, considering the recent debate in Parliament about the banning of fur importation after Brexit. Cross-party MPs are supporting our campaign for a fur-free Britain, and together we're urging the Environment Secretary to commit to the ban. It tells them why it's of interest now, because there was just a recent debate about fur in Parliament, and why it is of interest to their readers, because it has got very in-depth political relationship. And again, what I did there is I took the exact same information and you just portray it in a very different way to appeal to their readers. Add this to your checklist. Appeal to the readership of the outlets. Journalists also know that visuals, like video and photographs, are what sells newspapers and gets clicks and shares. Especially video. Video is only getting more popular. It's also really hard to get people's attention, whether they're reading a newspaper or, like we probably all do here, scrolling on Facebook. I mean, how long do you look at a piece of news? Maybe 2 seconds, and then you scroll past it. You need to grab both the journalist's attention to make them write about it, and you also need to grab people's attention once they read the article that's been published. And I think having a visual element is one way to do that. I mean, just take a look at these examples. Which one of these looks more like a story to you? I definitely think the one with the photograph looks more, well, I want to know what on earth is going on. What is this? Why is this woman so angry and upset? And that's why I encourage you in every press release, maybe don't necessarily need to have the picture directly in the email, but definitely try and have some kind of visual element that you can link to, that the journalist can click on and immediately see what the story is. Every time you do a demonstration or some kind of campaign, you have to think, how can we create a visual element to this? The next thing is to be fast. Sometimes you're competing with other organizations. You need to be the first one to get a press release out about a subject, or you just simply need to get the journalist, the information quickly. And with that in mind, I'm not going to say anything else. You just need to be quick, as I will be. Done. Interviews. I briefly touched on this and my fear of giving interviews. I will never get over that, I think, but I do have some tips on how you can all best give interviews for your organizations, or even if it's just yourself. So I'm going to talk about 5 different things. The first thing is you should dress well. In general, I think you should always try and be smart, and it's better to be over smart than underdressed. Imagine that you are going to a job interview. So if you're a woman, I would suggest wearing either a suit, smart trousers and a shirt, skirt and a shirt, and smart clean shoes. A guy, probably a suit or either smart trousers and a shirt. Not necessarily a tie unless it is a really formal debate of some kind. I don't generally like, this is probably just my own opinion, but when you wear, and I've done this as well, but wearing like logo t-shirts of your organization, I think sometimes that can work if you're at a demonstration and you're being interviewed there. But in general, I think you should go for the smarter option. I also think you should not wear too many patterns, like crazy patterned clothes, because it can be quite difficult for the televisions to pick up sometimes, or it can skew the sight. And also try and avoid wearing green, because if they do put you in a green room, like for the weatherman and stuff where you've got some kind of weird background going on, it will actually come on your clothes as well. So just avoid green. I would also recommend, even if you're not going on television, but you're doing a radio interview instead, still dress smartly, because they can make the decision to invite you back onto the program, even though the people listening may not see what you look like. The second thing is to act normal, or at least pretend to be normal. It's very important to be friendly and understanding. So even if you want to go on the radio and tell people how meat is murder and they're all guilty of genocide or whatever, you might think that, but it's probably not the best thing to say on a radio interview. In fact, research actually shows that it's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it. And more specifically, it means if they like you or not. If they like you personally, they're more likely to agree with what you're saying, or at least consider it, and think of your organization in positive terms. So try and be nice. Try and smile when you're speaking. And even if you're on the radio, try and smile, because it can be heard in your voice. The third thing, is actually to be prepared. So what I do when I go on an interview is I write in advance 3 things that I want to say in that interview in order of priority. And then usually, no matter what they ask me, I will find a way to answer with these 3 important questions. And in that way, you can lead the interview. Once you get more practice, you can actually do that, where you just get to say whatever you want. Now, I'm not suggesting you should go full-on politician and just not answer any of their questions. Not at all. Please answer their questions, but usually you can do so with a very short answer if they ask a silly question. Bridge with a sentence and then tell them more about what you actually want to say, why you came on that show in the first place. I also spend some time thinking about what actual questions they're going to ask me and pre-prepare answers for that, especially for difficult questions that you know are going to come up. And then you can almost sometimes, word for word, say the answer to it. The fourth thing is to always have a call to action. Usually when you go on an interview, you are going to talk to people about an issue, about something that's wrong. You're going to talk to them about a problem. You don't just want to tell them about this terrible thing, the worst thing that humanity has ever done, ever, and leave it there. You have to give them something that they can do, or else they're just going to be super depressed. So always be there with how they can help you. Usually I put this as my number 3 priority, is what I want to say, and how they can help, whether that's to go to the website, sign a petition, donate, or attend a demonstration. Have something that everyone listening can do, and it's actually really great if sometimes that can actually bring them to your organization and get them actually more involved in the future as well. The final thing for interviews is, if you do make a mistake, and honestly, if you start doing interviews, or you already are doing, you will know this, you're going to make a mistake. I've made so many. Learn from those mistakes and then move on. The worst thing you can do is internalize that, beat yourself up about, oh, I should have said this, or I've said the wrong figure, or oh, it would have been so much better if I told the fur industry guy that blah, blah, blah. You can really, really beat yourself up about that, but it's so important to just let it go, move on, and do better next time. So what happened with my organization in France? As I mentioned, we were campaigning really hard for about a year, and we were having very little impact, very few results. So what we did was, about 2 weeks ago, we organized 4 outreach events, 4 actions on 4 different university campuses around the country. We dressed up in pea and carrot costumes. Yes, this is me dressed as a carrot. And we held signs, which translates as "eat me." And we held these the actions around 4 different campuses. We also wrote press releases telling them what the story was, why it was important to their local area, why they should be writing about it in a national context. We collected all of the journalists' details, and we called them all up on the morning of the action to make sure they received the email, make sure they'd read the email, make sure that they were coming. And what was the result? We were in 5 regional newspapers, both online and in print. And this is actually one of the biggest regional newspapers in France. It's West France. We made it into the press, and suddenly the directors of the administrations who make the decisions to have vegan food in canteens, suddenly they were happy to meet with us. They started responding to our emails. Oh, I'm so sorry, we didn't see your emails for the last year. They started writing to us personally on Facebook. They even took us out for lunch. Now, consider we had been for a year being ignored by these people. Getting into the press can help you. In fact, getting in the press helps you show these people, whoever you're targeting, that you are serious, that you are not backing down, and you are taking your request public. After a year of being ignored, we were able to, in a week, meet with 3 out of 28 regional administrations, and we're now going to work with those administrations to put in place vegan meals in their university canteens in the future. We also have another meeting booked for soon, and I was actually really pleased to be able to share with you the fact that while I've been at this conference, we just heard from the University of Caen that they are now going to be, thanks to our campaign, the first ever university in France to offer a vegan meal every day in one of their canteens. It's great. So I think this really shows that using the press can help you achieve your campaign aims. We can now see that we can win this campaign, that we can get 8 million vegan meals served in France every year as a minimum. And we can do this. We can do this in the future, and you can do this too. With that in mind, I wanted to tell you about a saying. There is a saying that history belongs to those who won. I think it was actually my mother who said that, but it's a very good quote, I think. So history belongs to those who won. Well, I believe that the story belongs to those who tell it. You just need to go out there and tell your story. Thank you.
So thank you very much for very useful tips. Does anybody have a question?
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I have a question because my organization, we have a lot of topics and we send a lot of press releases. And if we would call all of them to see if they got it and so on, I think we would annoy them a lot. So how much do you think is too much, or how often should you send a press release?
Can you tell me how often you do send them?
It depends on what's going on, but several times a week probably.
Well, I would say you should only be sending press releases if something is actually of interest to the press, which I'm assuming that's what you do. And if it is of interest to the press, then they should want to know about it. So I would absolutely go ahead and call them, unless they say to you, listen, stop calling us, just keep doing it. I remember I also work with another group which is more traditional animal rights in France, and we went through a period where we were campaigning very hard against wild animals in circuses, and it was almost to a point where it was like one press release a day, and it was getting really ridiculous. But it was important, and they were writing about this stuff because it was very relevant, and they did it. They wrote about it. So I would advise that continue doing it, but only the stuff that they should be writing about. Like, if it is press-worthy, then they should know about it.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Thank you for your presentations. It's really interesting. If you have some, for example, journalists and some written media, like web media or, I don't know, newspaper, and he or she takes the interview and send you the article to pre-read, and it's really awful. What do you usually do?
Who are these journalists that are sending you the article before they print it? That almost never
in
happens.
Russia they do, but
okay. Usually what happens to me is you give an interview and then they publish it, and it's then that you find out it's terrible. That's the thing with journalists, they can write whatever they want. There's not really a way that you can stop them from writing what they want. If they do send you in advance, I would just say, I would be open with them and say, this is absolutely not what we wanted to portray at all. Can we discuss this? And ask them to change it. But I think probably most people in this room they aren't given the chance to be able to change it. But in Russia, you're from Russia, right?
Yes.
Yeah. If you've got the chance, then by all means.
Yeah, but I usually ask them to send it to me before they publish, and they do that. Okay, if they publish that awful thing, what you do?
I would probably be very annoyed and then move on. Maybe sometimes you can ask for, the right of response, which means you can have another article responding to that, saying, "This is not what we wanted. Like, this is what we were actually wanting to say with our campaign." As I mentioned, I've worked for PETA for a long time, so we're quite used to getting quite a lot of very bad press. And sometimes you just have to accept it. It's absolutely impossible to work with the press and not sometimes have some unhelpful articles.
I would advise you, what we do is to ask our activists to write to this media, because sometimes they release letters from readers, and then they can say, oh, this article was awful and I see it this way, and sometimes it's even in the press then.
Yeah, you can do that. By all means, if they have that section for, readers' letters, what have you, I would probably just leave it and move on and use my activists for something else, but you can certainly do that, for sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsty. It was really good. And I just wanted to ask about doing an outdoor interview, because that was the first one I ever got to do. And the cameraman told me where I should be standing. And he put me right, the sun was in my eye. So I was like this in the TV. So I wanted to know how much can I push that, by not being rude or anything, because I feel sometimes they're you have to do this, and I'm okay, thank you so much, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, but can I be a little bit no, I'm not gonna do this because I'm not in a good lighting or something like that?
I would absolutely say that if the sun is in your eyes, you can really just ask politely to move. It makes no sense for them to put you there because it's not going to look good on the television either if you're squinting. So always politely say, do you mind if we just move 3 centimeters here so that I can actually see what I'm doing? I think that's totally fine. I think it's a whole other thing if you refuse to do the interview, of course. But for anyone listening, you don't have to do exactly what the journalist, they're not kings and queens. You can certainly ask to be moved, or, can we do this in 5 minutes? But do try and give them what they want when you can.
We have time for a last question.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was very helpful. I was wondering how you approach media to get an interview at all. Do you write them an email, ask for an interview, or do you write them with a story that to basically compel them ask you?
So for interviews in general, usually what they come about because I've either sent a press release and it's about a big story, and usually my press releases, I think actually Anya, who's just walked in, she's going to talk about this a bit more, but I will put a quote from someone in the press release. She will talk about that. And usually, sometimes I will say at the end, Kirsty Henderson is available for interviews. If it's a bigger story, you're probably more likely to get requests for interviews. So I don't put this in every press release, because not every press release will warrant them taking the time to interview you. Most of the time, they'll just print your news release and your pictures. If you specifically want to seek an interview, by all means, you can just request. You can ask them. I would send another version of a press release from this person that you want to do the interview and say, this person says this why it's important to them. Maybe they are from the town that something's happening in, and say, this person is available for interviews now, and then call them back up. And it's just a case of changing the pitch and making that the biggest part of the pitch. I would also make sure that this person, if you're doing a demonstration, they are there and they're ready to talk to the press that just may show up on the day. That can often be the best way of actually getting an interview. I hope that's helpful.
So thank you very much again.
Thank you.